Yiboneh, Yiboneh, Yiboneh Hamikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temaneh. Yiboneh, Yiboneh, Yiboneh Hamikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temaneh. Neshama shir chadash.
Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome back to the Yiboneh Beit Midrash. Welcome home to Torah. A warm welcome home to Torah. Tonight's shir is going to be dedicated specifically to the subject and to families that suffer from parental alienation. We'll discuss that a little bit more during the shir. And it is by our dear friend David Weisskopf. Also, in addition to that, a refuah shalema to Yechiel Aryeh ben Rus. In other words, our learning should be towards the refuah shalema, as well as for Sarah Miriam bat Nechama. B'ezrat Hashem, through our learning, they should have a refuah shalema quickly and fully. Okay. For those who are new, right, we use the Yakar as the basis for our discussion. These are not my words. I'm not taking credit for anything that is being said here, except for the translation and the explanation. So I do encourage those who are watching us online to please go down into the description box, that we encourage you to learn Hebrew. It's also if you only read the English, most of the nuances of the lesson are not picked up. You just cannot pick them up entirely from the English. So therefore, we do encourage you to learn Hebrew and to use the Hebrew source sheets. So as an introduction, and maybe I think it's apropos to give a little bit of an introduction, we're going to deal with chapter 25 of Leviticus, verse 25. So on the page, it's 3/4 of the way down. And it follows Shemitah and Yovel, right? In other words, there's a sequence. Behar, Parashat Behar begins with those ideas. And the Yakar explains that many of the ideas embedded in the Parsha are to teach us faith in Hashem. Okay, Emunah in Hashem. And you can imagine, right? Just like the Torah says, the people are going to ask, what are we going to eat if you don't farm, you don't harvest? And God promises, Al tidag, don't worry, right? I'm going to provide in the 6th year enough for 3 years of crops, enough for the 6th year, the 7th year, and since you can't farm in the 7th year, part of the 8th year. So I'll provide 3 years worth of crops. So a lot of the, the underlying theme is Emunah. Now we're coming, in this part is, we're going to see doing business, Jews doing business with each other. That's going to be in verse 14, chapter 25, verse 14. Then we get to verse 25, where a person is a little bit destitute. I say a little bit because you'll see why. And he's going to sell his property, his field, his house. And then there's even a further destitution where his hand is faltering. And then there's even a further destitution where he's going to sell himself as a slave to a Jew. And then something even worse. He'll get so destitute, he'll even sell himself to a non-Jew. Okay, so there's a progression, but it starts, according to the Yakar, as a result of not handling Shemitah properly. Okay, in other words, handling Shemitah improperly causes aniyut, causes poverty. And we'll go through it and he'll explain. But one of the big concepts that we're going to deal with is called the goel, the person who is a karov, someone who is a relative of yours. It seems like an obligation of families to take care of one another, right? It says brother, but it also says the one who's closest to you. The brother idea means the Jew comes first. You have to help your own. And we'll see some laws regarding that. But hakarov elav, the person who's closest to you, it could be a parent to a child, could be a child to a parent, could be a brother, could be an uncle. But somebody, and you know what? And if you have no family, then whoever's closest to you, your friends, hopefully, right? It's very important to have friends. Somebody to come. Unfortunately, I'm going to bring this idea of parental alienation. I mean, it goes in every direction, horizontal and vertical. But there's so much dysfunction, and there's, unfortunately, I mean, when I grew up, I heard stories that this one doesn't talk to that one in the family, and not our family, other families. And I said, wow, that'll never happen in my family. And Baruch Hashem, it has not happened in my family, but it's a widespread, what's the word? Disease. It's a plague. So, I mean, we're right now in the counting of the Omer, the Sphira. We're heading towards what? Mount Sinai. What happens? The only way we can really receive the Torah is if we're biyachad, if we're mamish, right? Ish echad. Did I say Shavuos? Till Shavuos, right? We're standing at the mountain, and we're ish echad b'lev echad. And it starts with the family. That's what you're going to see when it comes to tzedakah, when it comes to kindness. And what they say, I forget how it goes. Money is thicker than blood, or blood is thicker than money. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Blood is thicker
than water. Blood is thicker. I don't know how that applies to money, but when it comes to really helping, this is your blood. This is it's the closest thing to who you are. Is your brothers and your sisters and your parents and your children. So I wanted to introduce that idea that there's a goel. There's somebody who's going to come and rescue, save a person from extreme poverty. And another idea is, and we'll discuss this in Rashi and in the Medrash, when a donkey is carrying a load, and it's a little bit wobbly, if one person, maybe with one finger, right, it's very easy to just hold it on, as opposed to if it drops to the bottom and it's now on the ground, it could be even 5 people cannot lift it up. You'll have trouble. So you can imagine before it falters, right, before it falls, the best thing is to come to the person's, I'm going to use the word rescue. We're talking about a financial rescue here. So let's begin. Now that you know, and let me just reiterate again the phrases. In chapter 25, verse 14, it's dealing with just business. Business, we use the word metatalin, meaning movable objects that you sell and move. That's because the person could use the money. Doesn't mean that they are impoverished. It just means they could use the money. Then you're selling, God forbid, right? The progression is that you're selling your property. And you're not supposed to sell it all. Only part of it. If you really need the money, the suggestion of the sages, right? Jews into real estate, don't sell it all. Hold on to real estate. It's always, first of all, you need a place to live and you need a place to farm so you can eat. Okay, and the next stage, God forbid, is the faltering. Mamish going downhill financially to the point where, God forbid, you have to sell yourself. That's slavery. And then that's to a Jew. We all know how a Jewish slave is supposed to be treated with a lot of respect, right? The Jewish concept of slavery is not at all what we think when we think about history, world history. And then, if you have to sell yourself to a goy, we're not even talking about a regular goy, you're talking about a ger toshav. A ger toshav is a non-Jew living in the land of Israel who vowed against doing idol worship. So at least that's better than the next step of being sold to an idol, meaning that you don't have to necessarily be worshiping the idol, but can you imagine being sold where you're cleaning up and polishing the idols? So that's like the worst step. Anyway, so let's begin with verse 25. If you look on the source sheet, if your brother becomes destitute and sells some of his inherited property, ki yamuch achicha. The word yamuch is used, and it means like down. He's becoming destitute, and he's machar me achuzato. He's selling part of, right? Even though in English it says he's selling some of it, but in the Hebrew it's from it. So he's selling something of it, part of his inherited property. Uvo go'alo hakarov elav. And comes the Redeemer, his Redeemer who's closest to him. And I think it doesn't necessarily mean in relationship alone, but because it could have been the father or the brother didn't have the money, but the uncle does. So it starts with people who are closest to you, and we'll go as mimcha achav. And what he wants to do is redeem the brother's sale. The sale already took place. Obviously, if you can help them, put him in business before he gets destitute. But at this point, he's destitute, and he sold the property. That the neighbor, the relative, can actually uproot the sale, meaning they have to renegotiate and get the property back. You can see in Rashi, if the brother becomes destitute and sells, this teaches us that a person may not sell his field except under pressure of poverty. So these are inheritance, right? How it works in Israel, meaning in ancient times, and will again happen in the future, that each tribe was given a lot, a particular place in Eretz Yisrael, and it was broken down into families and subfamilies, and this stayed within the family forever, even when you had, except in certain cities, but we're talking about the general property went from father to son, and not only that, that if it was sold, it would automatically go back and during the Jubilee year. So basically, if the relative came to redeem it in the middle of the cycle, so there would be a negotiation based on how many cycles it was used, how many crops per year, and what's left of the Jubilee cycle. Okay. Rashi continues, some of his inherited property, this is Jewish wisdom, but not all of it. Scripture teaches us proper conduct, namely one should leave one field, at least, minimum, for himself. And the fact that the buyer cannot renege, there has to be a renegotiation, he has to sell it back to him. The purchaser cannot impede the redemption. Let's look at the Yakar. That was the verse we're going to deal with. The Yakar says, you see on the sheet where I'm at, on 548.
Okay.
Right? Rabbi Zal, Darshu. So in the Medrash, they explain there is, they expound deeply, they examine it, and there's a smichut, kol ha-smichut beparshiot elu, the fact that there is a proximity to Shemitah, you'll see, al ha'oisei schora beperish shvis. The very fact that we're now dealing with poverty, it's all related to the first cause. Let's call it the first cause. Because, and I don't want to get into all the different angles right now, basically Shemitah is midrabanan, but planting and harvesting is deraisa. So once a majority of the Jews are coming out of the exile, come back to Eretz Yisrael, it will become deraisa. But nevertheless, the whole thing, nevertheless, we do treat it, certain acts of work, such as planting and harvesting, on a deraisa level, and one should litchachila use otzer based in. And I don't want to get into the whole idea of the sale. The people sell their land to the non-Jews, like they do on Pesach, but it's a lot different because there is an idea that you're not allowed to sell the Eretz Yisrael to non-Jews. Rav Kook gave a heter, a one-time heter, that in the early 20s, it was pretty hard to live here. We were impoverished. And he said, I'm going to allow it this time, but it has to be looked at. It has to be examined every Shemitah cycle. If we have an abundance, right, we can live on it, then we shouldn't rely on the sale anymore. So as far as I know, it never really was examined. And if you really examine it well, but there are other issues because many of the farmers are not religious and maybe they wouldn't do it properly. So there's a compromise. We can live with compromise, right? But each person should still ask their own rabbi what to do during Shemitah year. So if you're selling it, if you're involved in the sale of Shemitah produce wrongly, this could cause, and according to the Yakar, according to the Medrash, it causes poverty. Shesofo lavo lide oni, that if you misuse Shemitah, and by the way, when you purchase Shemitah property that's wrong, in a wrong way, the money you get back has Kedushat Shvit. So you have to be careful. It's not just the fruits, it's the money itself.
Okay. I'll call you. Okay.
Yesh kedemut raya lezeh. There's actually a bit of proof to this statement because it actually says in verse 14. I mentioned, look on source 2, it says when you make a sale to your fellow Jew and you make a purchase from the hand of your fellow Jew, you shall not wrong one another. So the idea in Hebrew, whenever we see a double language of a verb, as it says, v'chi timcharu mimchar, I would have just translated as it was a great sale. It was a very sale. It was a sale of a sale. Like it's like an emphasis on the word. There's no reason for that here. So the way to read it, at least look the way Art Scroll. And when you make a sale, what you do is you make sure to sell it to a Jew. That's how to understand it. When you sell something, sell to a Jew, right? But the very fact that it's double, the chi timchru mimchar, the Yakar explains, kafel lashon mechira. The very fact the word mechira is used twice. It's not like an emphasis, like we thought, but rather, Lomer L'chad's teaching you, shemimchar echad goyer es chavero. One sale is causing another sale. And what sale was that? The sale of the Shemitah produce, which you shouldn't have done in a forbidden way. And that's going to cause you, God forbid, to now experience the need for money. And you're going to sell sentimental items, things you normally wouldn't sell. You find things around the house. I need the money, I'll figure out what I can sell. And he says, Ki timcharu perishvit. The reason this now that you need to sell is because you originally sold the Shemitah produce in a not so straight manner, so it's bringing you now to the second sale of your objects that you would rather hold on to. Az mechira zu gorerit mimchar metatalin la'amitecha. Like we said in the beginning, verse 14 is dealing with metatalin, not real estate, but movable objects. This sale, the original sale of the Shemitah ends up causing you to sell some objects. And then there's a progression. The Yakar kach sadehu. Then you, God forbid, you end up selling your field. The Yakar kach atzmo. God forbid, then you're going to sell yourself. The Yakar kach leger. And afterwards to a ger toshav, meaning a non-Jew living in the land of Israel. Ki kol echad koshen mishalafanav. That each one is progressively harder and more severe than the one before it. And just to keep in mind, we know that 14 is talking about metatalin because it says ukona miyad, right? You're talking about buying from somebody. Then, by the way, it says amitecha twice, and we'll see in the Rashi why it says amitecha. You have to sell to your friend, to your people, and buy from your people, because a Jew comes first in business. Obviously, it's when everything's the same. If the guy's giving you a better deal, it's a whole other story. When it comes to loans, it doesn't work like that. See, a loan, you're allowed to do interest for the non-Jew, and for the Jew, it's forbidden. So you come to me for a loan, and a goy comes to me for a loan. I know I'm going to get a better deal from the goy, from the non-Jew, but I have to give you first, right? Because that's going to be, it's a directive in the pasuk. It's like a command. So let's see that Rashi on verse 14. It says, when you make a sale to your fellow Jew or make a purchase from your fellow Jew, the simple meaning is obvious, but the verse can also be expounded to teach you another lesson. Shulam, you're still on, can you mute? Thanks. How do we know that when you wish to sell, you should sell to your fellow Jew? The scripture actually says, right? La mitecha. And when you make a sale to your fellow Jew, how do we know that when you come to buy, you should buy from your fellow Jew? The same thing. Okona miyad amitecha. Amitecha is used. Now, and you shall not wrong, that's a second part of the verse. This means wronging through money, and then that could be compounded sin. Number one, the sin of dealing with Shemitah, and perhaps the sin of wronging through money can also bring poverty. Okay? Greed can bring poverty. Okay, Let's go back to the Yakar, and it's the new paragraph. Venira, kishinoi halashon bekol parshiot elu Maharal zeh. That the change, there's anomalies, there's small nuances in the language of these parshiot that reflects this, that teaches this, that enlightens, right? What's the word moreh? It's from enlightening, right? It's from teaching. It's going to tell you about it. Ki b'machiret metatalin lo hiskir. Back in verse 14, it never mentions ki yamuch, that anybody was poverty-stricken or destitute. And ki yachal yot shlefamim adam moicher metatalav afa pi she'enu mach me'er kol kochach. People do business all the time. They're selling things. El shu nitztarech lezuzeh. There are times that people get involved in sales of movable objects, even though they're not so destitute. Right? Their value didn't really plummet. They didn't lose a lot of their value. But you just need some money. And that makes sense. Aval, but when it comes to the property, the real estate, me'achuzato afilu mitzasa, even a small amount of property that you might have to sell, eino moicher ad kiyamuch. A person would not sell this until they become really in need of money, until they become more level of destitution. But their hands are not faltering. They're not yet on a downslide financially. They might have gone down from their value at this point, but they're not on a downslide. When it says moto yado, we're talking about the hands are basically faltering. I mean, he's really not capable. And what happens? A lot of people, unfortunately, they exploit the vulnerable, right? So he says, Al kain hoisik belokeach beribit. And then the seller is likely, and this is a little bit hard because what's the purchaser? Having ribit. So the example I think of is like this. You're the owner of the store, and a guy comes to you. And he says, I need 4 candles. I need 4 candles. And you say, okay, this is what it costs for 4 candles. He says, oh, I don't have money on me now. He says, you know what? Take the 4 candles now. I'm going to charge you for 5. And you can pay me in 6 months. That's ribis, right? This whole thing with the credit card system is problematic. But that's what you're doing to this guy. You're helping him, but you're really taking advantage of him at the same time. So that's what I think it means, that you're likely to cause even a worse situation, taking advantage of or exploiting him. As verse 35 now enters the idea of matiyado. So in chapter 25, verse 35, you'll see that number 5 on the source sheet. If your brother becomes destitute and his hand falters beside you. See, we didn't see the hand faltering until 35. So we started with 14 with metatalin. Then we get to 25 dealing with selling real estate. And he's already destitute. Then we see 35, not only is destitute, but his hand is faltering. And there you says, you shall support him, whether a convert or a resident, so that he can live with you. So we'll have to see what Rashi says. I just want to finish with the clear cards to say, it says, Kasaf Lashon Imach, right? It does say Imach, with you, which we didn't see before. So at this point, there's something that's happening with you. And we just said, you might be taking advantage. You're with him, al hitmotutut, with his faltering, with his downfall. You may actually have a play, if you're going to charge him interest, a bigger play in his downfall. And it's not going on the ki yamuch, on the downfall part, on the yamuch, on the destitution, but it's going on his downfall. Ki davar zeh giloi imach, ki azlat yad, v'kocho az eno ota. This is what we were discussing, that this now has become revealed to you. Like you are with him. You are totally aware of his helplessness, That's what it means. Azlat yad, v'kocho, his abilities. He cannot get out of the situation. And you ain't helping. You're making it worse. Aval mashu mach adayin eno imach. But this idea that his destitution, you ain't feeling it. It's not really with you. Because still it hasn't been revealed how much disgrace and shame in public because of his destitution. But once he sells himself, that's like the worst situation a person could be in. I just want to stop here. I want to make sure that we read that Rashi in source number 5, where it says, right, it's chapter 25, verse 35, that double language, one language of destitute and the second language of faltering his hand. And then we have this directive, you have to help him. What does Rashi say? Don't allow him to fall down and collapse altogether, in which case it would be difficult to pick him up again from his dire poverty. Rather, support him while his hand is still faltering. That's what it means. You're with him, for it is easier to help him out of his trouble. To what can this be compared? How are we going to compare it? How are we going to understand it? Through a mashal. To a load on a donkey, while it's still on the donkey, one person can grasp it. Maybe even with one hand, maybe with one finger, but it's so much easier just to hold it in place. But once it falls to the ground, it could be that even 5 people, it's going to be very difficult for them to pick up. Maybe they can't even pick it up. What did we say in the pasuk when it said, right, in this verse, whether a convert or a resident? So Rashi says, even if he is a convert, that would be a Jew, he becomes Jewish. Or a toshav. What's a toshav? That's a non-Jew who accepted upon himself not to worship idols. And he's living amongst you. Okay, so there are 2 things that are mentioned there. Now, carrion is an avela, I think. Is that right? Where do you see the word?
Roadkill.
Oh, but it's nevela. They can eat nevela, right? The ger toshav. Okay, no problem with that. So the Yakar, 4 lines down, right? We just read that. Okay, so the 5th line, Amar. So what does the pasuk say in verse 39? See, look at number 6 on the source sheet. And if your brother becomes destitute with you and is sold to you, so you, the Jew, are buying this Jewish slave, right? And so, of course, you're not allowed to work him with slave labor, which is degrading work. You're not allowed to ask your slave, your Jewish slave, to do anything that you yourself are not willing to do. If you clean the toilets, you can ask him to clean the toilets. But otherwise, you cannot ask him to do anything that's considered degrading less than you. Okay, so the Yakar continues. At this point, when the person sold himself, it's obviously and revealed that he is in a very bad situation. He wouldn't have sold himself. He is really destitute. So it's like the worst situation. Meaning now it's already revealed his poverty, his wretchedness, and his pressured situation. It's obvious. Nobody's going to sell themselves unless they're in that position. After the fact, he has been pushed, right? Muchrak, it's proven, it's obvious. It was a necessity that he had to sell himself. Well, 1 second now. Ubenimchar lager, when he sells himself to the ger toshav, to the non-Jew living in Israel, shenig legam lager kimachu. Then it's like revealed to the whole world, right? Listen, who wants to hang their dirty laundry in public, right? That's the idea. It's a phrase. Obviously, people do. Maybe they don't. They hang their clean laundry in public, but they don't. Nobody wants to hang their dirty laundry in public. And so now, first of all, it's now revealed to the Jewish community. Now it's revealed to others outside of the community. If you sold yourself to the non-Jew, Lechach Amar, and that's why in verse 47. See, before we said he was destitute with you, like in verse 39 and even in verse 35. But in 47 it says, imo. What's the difference between imach and imo? One is with you and one is with him. We're talking about a third person, not a Jew. So that's what it means in verse 47. If a resident non-Jew gains wealth with you, I mean he has the whereabouts to buy a slave, and your brother becomes destitute with him. What does it mean with him? And is sold to a resident non-Jew among you or to an idol. We'll talk about these two ideas here. So the Yakar says, the fizeh tzrichin anu lomar. The very fact it says imo, you're becoming destitute with him. In shemicha gerua mimata yado, that the destitution is actually worse when it comes to being sold to the non-Jew than the faltering. And then he says shneim ke'echad geruim min achas mehem. It's like a progression that both of them are together worse than one of them. Imach, the fact he's with you in the beginning, imicha grua min imach, that the poverty is worse than the imach of matayado. But then it says imo, that means with the goy, that's shoger gerua mikulam. Being a slave to a non-Jew is worse than, that's like the worst kind of revealed poverty or shame. Okay? Do you recall that when we were in verse 14, we said at the end of the verse, when you're doing business, metatalin lo tonu, don't oppress in a business deal. So if you look at Leviticus chapter 19, verse 33, when a stranger sojourns with you in the land, kiyagur itchager be'artachem lo sonu oto, do not oppress him. This is don't oppress him financially. For instance, don't say to him, now this is not necessarily a ger tzedek. For sure, ger tzedek, you never say this to a convert. But even to a ger toshav, if they renounced, they renounced idol worship, they're now living with you. Don't say to him, don't taunt him, don't oppress him by saying the following. For instance, don't say to him, only yesterday you were an idol worshiper, and now you come to learn Torah, which was given over by the Almighty God himself, which is interesting. This is another idea that by non-Jews, especially Ger Toshav, the living with Jews, they're allowed to learn a lot more Torah. First of all, there is a concept, right? When we come into the land of Israel, Moses was told, and then told you, right? He didn't do it himself, but he told them, you have to write the whole Torah on these stones. By when they crossed over the Jordan, and again in Galgal, and by Shechem. There were 3 places perhaps, but at least one time for sure, they wrote the whole Torah in 70 languages. Okay, there's some opinions, it was only the 10 Commandments, there's some that it was the 7 Noahide laws, but it says that the Torah was basically written, a miracle, in 70 different languages, according to many opinions. That's so that when non-Jews come to visit the land of Israel, they would know what the 7 laws are, or they would know what's expected of them in the company of Jews. Right? What else would you need the Torah for? Written on these rocks in 70 languages. So it was for the non-Jew, perhaps even to take back with them. It was written on plaster, or plaster would be, let's say you put clay on it and you copied the words. Remember, people didn't actually write as well as they do or have paper, but if you had clay and it was already plaster on the rock, it was like engraved in the rock, it could give the engraving and you take it back with you and you show your neighbors in your country that you came from. Do we know where it is? No. We don't know where it is. One day maybe they'll find it. They do a lot of archaeological discoveries almost daily. I think they found in the last month 2 gold rings. Where was it? In the city of David. Okay, so I'm just going over some of the things that we skipped. If you look on verse 47, because we mentioned if the ger toshav, the non-Jew, gains wealth with you, it's so fascinating. How did the ger toshav get money? How did he become wealthy? He's living in the land of Israel. We treat non-Jews who have given up idol worship and in public, meaning in a Beis Din, say they want to keep the 7 Noahide laws. They take on the 7 Noahide laws. We treat them with utter respect, utmost respect, doing business with them, giving them tzedakah on a welfare basis. They're like any other Jew, right? Obviously, and halakhically, they're not Jewish, but from a welfare point of view. Look what Rashi says: a resident non-Jew. Even though it says ger vitoshav in the beginning. If you look in the fourth, right, l'kitasig yad ger vitoshav. Later on in the verse, it says le ger toshav. So it's like a clarifying. Again, look at Rashi. It says ger vitoshav in the beginning, a stranger who is a resident, meaning a stranger here in this case is a non-Jew. Not every time the word ger appears in the Torah does it mean a ger tzedek or a ger toshav. You have to know from the oral Torah what it's talking about. And it may not refer at all to either one. It just could mean just a wanderer. Right? By Abraham, he says ger v'toshav, meaning God wanted him and Yitzhak and Yaakov to be wanderers. And we were going to be in Egypt also as gerim, strangers in a strange land. So you need the oral Torah to know when, each time it's used, what it's referring to. And Rashi even mentions even Ankelis. He renders it as a ger toshav, an aral totav, meaning an uncircumcised resident. At the end of the verse, it proves this is one person, not two, not a ger and a toshav, but a ger toshav, as it says, and I pointed out, at the end, it says ger toshav. Now, what caused this non-Jew to become wealthy? His connection with you. His connection with you. He gained wealth through the blessing of the Jewish people. We have been in exile for 2,000 years, and wherever we went, we made many countries financially successful. Somehow. I mean, I just came across, I'm sorry to bring this up, but some of us, had a secular background, and we know who Olivia Newton-John was. I had no idea that she was Jewish. But more fascinating is, not only was she Jewish, her grandfather, Max Born, was an unbelievable scientist who not only won a Nobel Peace Prize, all right, but he has 5 students that won. Like, imagine that. I mean, that's pretty brilliant, right? To have taught over to students who also won 5 of them. So anyway, that's pretty impressive. Why did I bring that up? Because wherever the Jews go, we are helping society on whether it's financially, whether it's what they call from a medical point of view. So many discoveries have happened, and I just, look what happened. I think it's a great thing. It's a great thing that the Jews left all these Arab lands in the 40s and the 50s. Because if they were there today, or for the last 70 years, it would have been very, very difficult. It was a real blessing in disguise that the Jews had been pushed out. It's a blessing in disguise. But you can see wherever any country that expelled its Jews, like sand. I mean, like England. We have a Brit telling us what happened in history. Okay, so it says here, how did this non-Jew become wealthy? Because his connection with you. He gained his wealth through the blessing of the Jewish people. And what about your brother? He becomes destitute with him. You know why he became destitute with him? Because he learned from the non-Jew. It's, in other words, it goes both ways. The Jews are going to learn from us and succeed. If we get involved with them, there's a big risk of, I'll just read the words, what caused his destitution, his connection with him, because he learned from his deeds. Just the other idea about the idolater, because in the verse there is a progression. Sold to a non-Jew or to an idol. You're not sold to an idol. You're sold to like a cult who then has you working for the sake of the idol. I'll just read the Rashi. Without the word la'aker, the expression means that the Jew is sold to an idolater. But when Scripture says la'aker, meaning to uproot, it's making it la'aker mishpachat ger. It's referring to a Jew who's sold to the idol itself, meaning you become an attendant. You're sweeping the floors, you're polishing the idols. He doesn't worship as a deity, but he does chop wood and draw water for the sake of the cult. Just keep in mind, and look at source number 9, Leviticus 25:36. It uses two words. You shouldn't take interest or increase. So in Hebrew, you have two different words. So you have neshek, which is like to bite, and we're going to discuss that a little bit, and ribit, which is usury. Okay, increase. So Rashi says, what do these two words mean? The rabbis regard these as one. So every time you give a loan and charge interest, you violate two different commands, even though it's one act. The Torah is separating into two different things. And there are going to be discussions about it, which we're not going to get into that much, but it's definitely worth investigating. What is this? You shall fear your God. So that's what the verse says. You shall not take interest, but rather you should fear your God. A person's natural desire is to take interest. I mean, right? Even those other religions, the daughter religions of Judaism, for example, Islam is against taking interest. Christianity, for many years, that's why the Jews became moneylenders, because they claimed under their religion that they didn't want to do it, but it's okay for the Jews, right? Well, it is true that the Jews can't charge interest to non-Jews, so it really was okay. But I want to get into a fundamental idea, and it's something that takes a lot of thought. Why should it be permissible for a Jew to take interest from a non-Jew? Right? Jew to a Jew, forbidden. Comes the non-Jew, all of a sudden it's permissible. Doesn't that make us look bad in the eyes of the nations? What's going on here? So this comes maybe back to the idea, would you ever lend your brother money with interest? Of course not. Family, back to what we said, it's blood is thicker than water. I don't know why I said blood is thicker than money, but anyway, blood is thicker than water. This is your blood. He needs a loan. You would never charge your brother interest. We are light to the nations. We are supposed to show the world how to treat each other. Now, imagine, so why aren't we treating them like that? Because they'll never learn the lesson if we gave them free loans as well. Just try to imagine, theoretically, right? They see the Jews, how they treat each other. Fantastic. So they say to themselves, listen, I need a loan. Would you give me a free loan? The guy says, no, go to the Jews. So it's like, it's an excuse that enables them never to really learn the lesson. So the Jew charges the outside, the other's interest, but you can all see what they're doing, how they're treating each other. They should take that lesson back to themselves. Treat each other just like the Jews treat each other. But again, that lesson seemingly, maybe I'm underestimating humanity or overestimating humanity, underestimating, that if we gave each other free loans, and when it came to them, we gave them free loans as well, there's no question. Vinny and whatever his name is, right? Give me another name, Vinny and Fonzie. So they're gonna, they need a loan to work out a business. We're just gonna go to the Jews and get our free loan, and lesson not learned. I don't know if you like that, but I heard that from Rabbi Yochanan Zweig. I think it's very important. Just if you look at number 11, Deuteronomy 23:21. However, you may, however, give interest to the Gentile, but to your brother you shall not give interest. It's black and white. We didn't make it up. It's not like it's a rabbinic discussion. Can you? Can't you? It's clear that in the Torah itself, this is the way it's done. I want to just take you to Bava Metzia 71a, because It's taught in a brisa. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says concerning anyone who has money. Now this is going to be an inference. We're going to say about one truth, and we're going to learn the opposite from it. You have money, you lend it without interest. So what happens? You get a blessing. He who has not given his money with interest, this is in Psalms 15:5. It's a quote. Psalms 15:5. You did not give your money with interest, and you didn't take a bribe against the innocents. Whoever does this never collapses. So if you give loans without interest, you're going to be saved from collapse. Now that means financial collapse. Does that mean physical buildings around you? Most likely it's talking about financial standing. You won't collapse. Now the Gemara says from this statement, the opposite can be inferred. Meaning that anyone who lends his money to others with interest,
Who does not lend money?
Okay, I'm 2 lines further than you. And it says, from this statement, the opposite can also be inferred. You learn from this that concerning anyone who, yes, does lend his money to others with interest, his property will collapse. Meaning the value or maybe the physical property itself will collapse. So the Gemara asks, but one second. We see people who don't lend money with interest, that mean they're doing the right thing, and we see them collapse financially or their buildings collapse. Rabbi Elazar says there's still a difference. There's an explanation. Those who do not lend money with interest, that means they're doing the right thing, even though they collapse, they can always and will ultimately get up. They will rise, right? They will. It fluctuates, but you're not permanent. But these who lend with interest, they collapse and do not rise again. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. We really did not cover the entire Yakar, but I think we got a pretty good basis for this, starting with Shemitah. God forbid it can cause poverty, and the poverty of a person could be a progression, and we're there to help, first of all, Hakarov Alav. We have to keep a great pulse, an eye on our family, how to set them up in business, how to make sure that this never comes to be. I think that's a great lesson for the world. But love and charity always starts at home, and there are lessons here in this parsha that if a rich person comes, you're supposed to give loans to rich people too, even though they're making money off of that. But the poor person comes first. Okay, who comes first? Your relatives, and after that, then the people of your city, and after that, the people. So there's a whole progression also, starting with the people. When they say charity starts at home, I think that's a statement, and that's true. And B'ezrat Hashem, we'll all learn to be better people and to support our brethren and extend out to the world. And hopefully, the world will see how we treat each other. If we can only get to that point, we really treat each other with love and respect. And that light should shine, and others should learn how to treat each other if we're doing the right thing. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll see you next week.
Yiboneh